We analyzed all the sacred texts on the immortality of the soul and found a contradiction that destroys the entire logic. If the soul is eternal and indivisible, where did the additional 7,993,000,000 new souls come from over the last 2,000 years? The math doesn't add up, religious explanations don't hold up, and the conclusion we've come to forces us to rethink everything we've been told about the nature of consciousness. Do you think the soul can exist in the form described by religions? Write your thoughts in the comments, because this question has been troubling humanity for 3,000 years. We have been taught that the soul is immortal, that it comes into this world and lives out its life in the body, eternal, indestructible, as real as our breath. But when you start to analyze sacred texts, a question arises that no one can give a clear answer to. The question is so simple that it seems strange why it is not asked more often. We processed texts from the Bible, the Quran, the Vedas, and philosophical treatises. We looked for references to the nature of the soul, its origin and essence, compared descriptions from different traditions, checked the logical consistency of each statement, and discovered a pattern that changes the entire understanding of the question. Let's start with the basic statements. Christianity says that the soul is created by God at conception or birth. Islam supports a similar concept. Judaism also leans toward the idea of the creation of the soul. The Vedas offer a different model, reincarnation. But all these traditions agree on one thing: the soul is eternal, it cannot be destroyed. Now let's look at the numbers. At the beginning of our era, there were about 300 million people living on Earth. Today, there are more than 8 billion of us. That's a 26-fold increase. If every soul is eternal and indivisible, then almost 8 billion new souls have appeared from somewhere. In the Bible, in the book of Genesis, it is written, "And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." This is the first chapter of the second book of Moses. It clearly describes the moment of the creation of the first soul, the act of creation. God breathes life. But then the text is silent about how new souls appear. Traditional Christian theology offers the concept of soul creationism. Each new soul is created by God at the moment of conception. This means that God is constantly creating new souls, 80 million a year, 219,000 a day, 152 souls a minute, a constant, unending creation of new immortals. Every second, 2.5 people are born somewhere, and an eternal soul is created for each one. If this is so, then the following question arises: why does God continue to create souls, knowing that many of them will go to hell? If He's omniscient, He sees the fate of every soul before it is created. He knows that this particular soul will sin, will not repent, and will suffer eternally, and yet He creates it anyway. The logic breaks down. An all-good God deliberately creates beings for eternal torment. Theologians try to explain this with free will. They say that God gives the soul a choice, but that does not solve the problem. If He's omniscient, He knows the result of the choice before it is made. If He knows, then the choice is predetermined. If it is predetermined, then there is no free will. This creates a vicious circle from which there is no logical escape. There is another Christian concept, traditionalism. The soul is passed from parents to their children, just like the body. This solves the problem of constant creation, but creates a new one. If the soul is divisible, then it is not indivisible. If it is indivisible, then it is not eternal in the classical sense. A part of something divisible is no longer the same whole. The Quran in Surah 32, verse 9 says, "Then He proportioned him and breathed into him of His Spirit." Here too, it is about breathing in the Spirit, about creating the soul. Islamic tradition clearly stands on the position of creationism. Allah creates each soul individually. But Islamic theologians cannot explain how this fits in with the concept of predestination or qadar. In Islam, there is the concept of the kitab, the book of destiny. The fate of every person is recorded before their birth. But if the fate is predetermined, including the final destination in paradise or hell, then we return to the question, why create a soul that is doomed to eternal torment? This is not consistent with the mercy of Allah, which is emphasized in every surah.
But here too, mathematics creates a problem. If the number of souls is constant, where does population growth come from? Vedic cosmology offers an explanation. Souls do not only migrate between humans, they can be born as animals, plants, even microorganisms. As karma grows, the soul ascends the ladder of life forms. This means that the increase in the human population is offset by a decrease in souls in animal forms. But let's check this logic. Over the past 50 years, the human population has grown from 3 billion to 5 billion. That's an increase of 5 billion souls. If they came from animal forms, there should have been a corresponding reduction in animals. We see the extinction of species, yes, but the scale is not the same. Animal biomass has declined, but not enough to explain the appearance of 5 billion new human souls. Moreover, the Vedas speak of a strict hierarchy. A soul cannot simply jump from the form of an insect to that of a human. A gradual ascent through many rebirths is required. First insects, then fish, then birds, then mammals, and only then humans. This path takes millions of rebirths. So where did the sharp jump in the human population over the last 200 years come from? One might assume a demographic explosion. Medicine has reduced mortality and increased fertility. But this only explains the number of bodies, not souls. If every body needs a soul, and souls are not created out of nothing, then there must be a reservoir of souls awaiting incarnation. But the Vedas do not describe such a reservoir. Some Buddhist and Hindu traditions say that souls can come from other worlds, from other dimensions. When karma ripens, the soul is born in human form on earth. This may explain the growth. But then a new question arises. Why is there such an influx right now? What has changed in other worlds? Why have billions of souls suddenly decided to incarnate here? Let's go back to basics. What is a soul according to the sacred texts? In Christianity, the soul is the image of God in man, an immaterial essence, the bearer of personality, consciousness, and will. In Islam, it is the ruh, the spirit breathed into man by Allah. In Hinduism, it is the Atman, a particle of the supreme Brahman. In all traditions, the soul is described as something indivisible, eternal, and indestructible. Indivisible means that the soul does not consist of parts. It cannot be divided into components. Eternal means that it has no beginning and end in time. Indestructible means that no force can end its existence. These three attributes are present in all major religious traditions. But if the soul has no beginning, where did it come from? Christianity and Islam say that the soul is created by God. This means that it has a beginning, a moment of creation. Then the soul is not eternal in the strict sense. It is immortal in the future, but mortal in the past. It has a point of origin. Hinduism says that the Atman is eternal and uncreated. It has always existed. Then the question of individuality arises. If all Atman are eternal and uncreated, then their number is infinite or, of course, fixed. If it is fixed, then we return to the problem of population growth. We tried to find a direct answer to this question in the texts. We looked for references to the number of souls, whether their number is limited. There is no such information in the Bible, nor in the Quran. Vedic literature mentions an innumerable multitude of living beings, but countless is a metaphor or a mathematical statement. If there is an infinite number of souls, then the problem of population growth is solved. There are always souls waiting to be incarnated. But then a philosophical paradox arises. If there are an infinite number of souls, then why are not all of them incarnated at the same time? What is holding them back? Why do billions of souls have to wait their turn to be born? Some Kabbalistic texts in Judaism speak of the Guf, the heavenly repository of souls. All unborn souls are stored there, waiting for their time to come. When the time comes, the soul descends and enters the body. This concept solves the problem logically. There is a repository, there is a process, there is an explanation for population growth. But Kabbalah is not mainstream in Judaism. It is an esoteric teaching that many rabbis do not accept. Moreover, even Kabbalah does not explain whether the number of souls in the Guf is finite or infinite. If it is finite, then it will end at some point. And then what? Humanity will cease to reproduce. The Talmud in the tractate Evamot says that the Messiah will not come until all the souls from the Guf are born. This directly indicates the finitude of the number. So there is a limit, a last soul after which there will be no more births. But how many are there? A billion? A trillion? The text is silent. Let us return to reincarnation. Suppose that the Vedas are right and souls circulate. Then there must be a balance. As many are die as are born. But we see demographic growth. This means that more are born than are dying. Where does the difference come from?
We can say that the time between death and rebirth is getting shorter. Before, a soul could wait 100 years for a new incarnation, but now it waits 10. The flow has sped up. But why? What has changed in the mechanism of reincarnation? The Vedas don't give an answer. There's another theory in some esoteric traditions. The soul can be divided. One soul can create several fragments that incarnate separately. This explains the growth of the population, but contradicts the basic definition. If the soul is indivisible, it cannot be divided. If it can be divided, then it is not indivisible. We analyze the texts for any mention of the division of the soul. There is no such concept in Christianity, neither does Islam. In Hinduism, there are hints in some tantric texts, but they are not canonical. Buddhism generally denies the existence of a permanent soul, speaking of a stream of consciousness, but that is a different philosophy. Let's approach the question from another angle and analyze the moment of death. What happens to the soul when the body dies? Christianity says that the soul separates from the body and goes to judgment. After judgment, it goes to paradise, a place of healing. It remains there until the day of resurrection. Then the soul is reunited with the resurrected body. If all the souls of the dead are waiting for resurrection, then they do not return to earth. This means that there is no circulation. This means that a new soul is needed for each new birth. And we return to the question of the creation of 80 million souls per year. Islam has a similar eschatology. After death, the soul is in the grave, in a state of Barzakh, in an intermediate world. There it awaits Judgment Day, then the resurrection and the final judgment. So in Islam, souls do not circulate, they accumulate in Barzakh, and again, new ones must be constantly created. In Hinduism, after death,
The soul can enter various lokas, worlds. Swarga is the heavenly world. Naraka is the hellish worlds. There it spends time corresponding to its karma. When karma is exhausted, the soul returns to earth for a new birth. This explains circulation, but does not explain population growth. It can be assumed that time flows differently in different lokas. In Swargaloka, 1 day is equal to 1 year on earth. The soul spends 100 heavenly years there, which is equal to 36,000 earthly years. During this time, many generations are born and die on earth. When the soul returns, the world is already different. But this does not solve the problem mathematically. If the soul spends 36,000 years in Swarga, and 1 billion new people are born on earth during this time, where did their souls come from? Even if we take into account the difference in time, the balance does not add up. We analyze demographic data for the last 2,000 years. At the beginning of our era, approximately as many people died as are now living on the planet, somewhere around 8 billion deaths in 2 millennia. If all these souls were reincarnated, then the current population should consist of these same souls. But then where did the growth come from? If we assume that all those who have died throughout human history have been reincarnated and are now alive, then we should see a stabilization of the population. But this is not happening. The population continues to grow. This means that either not all of the deceased have been reincarnated, or new souls are appearing. There are estimates that about 100 billion people have been born throughout human history. If this figure is correct, and if reincarnation exists, then approximately 8% of all people who have ever lived are now living on Earth. Where are the remaining 92%? Are they waiting in other worlds, or do they not reincarnate at all? Traditional Hindu cosmology speaks of cycles of creation and destruction. A kalpa, or day of Brahma, lasts 4.32 billion years. Then comes the night of Brahma, when the universe dissolves. Souls are in an unmanifest state at this time. When a new day of Brahma begins, they manifest again. If this is the case, then the number of souls is constant throughout the kalpa. They simply transition between the manifested and unmanifested states. But again, this does not explain the population growth within a single cycle. If there were 100 million souls in human bodies at the beginning of the cycle, why are there now 8 billion? It can be assumed that at the beginning of the cycle, most souls were in non-human forms. As consciousness evolves, more and more souls reach the human level. This explains the growth. But then there must be a corresponding reduction in souls in animal forms. And not just a reduction, but a dramatic decrease. According to biologists' estimates, there are about 20 quintillion animals on Earth. That's 2 with 20 zeros. If over the last 2,000 years, 8 billion souls have transitioned from animal forms to human forms, that is a drop in the ocean. 20 quintillion million billion is still approximately 20 quintillion. Therefore, the theory of souls transitioning from animal forms to human forms does not explain the population growth.
The scales are incomparable. Even if we assume that billions of souls are transitioning, this does not create a noticeable deficit in the animal world. Then what? We analyzed all the major religious models. The Christian creationist model requires the continuous creation of millions of souls. The Islamic model is the same. The Hindu reincarnation model does not explain population growth. The Buddhist model denies the existence of a permanent soul altogether. Perhaps the problem lies in the way the question is framed. Perhaps the concept of the soul as described in religions does not correspond to reality. Perhaps the soul is not an object, but a process, not a thing, but a phenomenon. There is a school of philosophy that offers this view. The soul is not a substance, but a function.
It is a property of living matter of a certain complexity. When the brain reaches a critical level of organization, consciousness arises. This is the soul. It is not something brought in from outside, but an emergent property of the system. This model solves the problem of population growth. There is no need to create new souls. They arise automatically when a new brain is formed. But this model contradicts religious understanding. If the soul is a function of the brain, it cannot exist separately from the body. This means that there is no life after death, no heaven and hell, no reincarnation. Religions respond to this by saying that although the soul is connected to the body, it has an independent existence. It uses the brain as an instrument, but is not identical to it, just as a pianist uses a piano. When the instrument breaks, the pianist does not disappear. But this analogy raises a new question. If the soul uses the body as an instrument, why does damage to the brain change personality? Why does trauma to the frontal lobe make a person aggressive? Why does Alzheimer's disease destroy memory and self-identity? If the soul is independent of the brain, these changes should not affect it. Neuroscience shows a direct link between brain structure and aspects of personality. Damage a certain area and character, memory, and empathy will change. If the soul is something separate, why is it so dependent on its physical vessel? Religious thinkers respond that the soul is indeed dependent on the state of the body in this life, but after death it is freed and returns to its true nature. Brain damage is interference in the communication channel. The transmitter itself, the soul, remains intact. This explanation works on the level of faith, but not on the level of logic. Because we cannot verify the state of the soul after death, we can only study its manifestation in a living body. And all the data indicates that consciousness, personality, and memory are functions of the brain. There is a well-known thought experiment. Suppose we can copy the structure of the brain atom by atom and recreate it in another medium. The copied brain will have the same memories, the same personality. Where is the soul here? In the original, in the copy, in both, or in neither? If the soul is tied to the original, then the copy is a soulless zombie. But the copy would behave in exactly the same way, have the same thoughts and feelings. How can we distinguish a being with a soul from a being without one if their behavior is indistinguishable? If the soul is present in copy, then it can be duplicated, but then it is not indivisible. If there is no soul in either, then it is not connected to the physical structure. Then what exactly determines which body it is attached to? These questions reveal the depth of the problem. The concept of the soul, as described in religions, creates many logical contradictions, the main one being the problem of quantity. We have returned to the original question by a different route. If the soul is something real, separate from the body, eternal and indivisible, where do so many of them come from? 80 million a year, every year without stopping. If God creates them, then He is constantly busy with this process. One could say that this is not a problem for an omnipotent God. He can create infinitely. But then the question of purpose arises. Why create billions of souls knowing that many will suffer eternally? The traditional answer is that God gives every soul a chance at salvation. The choice is up to them. But if God is omniscient, He sees the choice in advance, sees that this particular soul will choose evil and still creates it. It turns out that He creates evil, knowing about it in advance. Theologians talk about the mystery of free will, about the fact that God's omniscience does not negate human choice. But this is philosophical juggling with words. Either the future is predetermined and then choice is illusory, or the future is open and then God is not omniscient. You can't have both at the same time. It's a logical contradiction, and it's directly related to the question of souls. If God creates souls knowing their fate, He is responsible for that fate. If He doesn't know, He is not omniscient. Perhaps God's omniscience is different.
Perhaps He sees all possible options, but does not know which one will be realized. This makes the future open and preserves free will. But then God does not know for sure whether the soul will go to heaven or hell. He creates it, risking that it will choose evil and suffer eternally. This is more like gambling than an act of benevolent creation. To create a being that may end up in eternal torment, knowing that such an outcome is possible, what loving parent would take such a risk? If we accept the model of reincarnation, the problem of the ethics of creation disappears. Souls are not created, they already exist. They go through cycles of birth, accumulating experience and improving themselves. But then we return to the problem of quantity. If souls are not created, their number is constant. Where does population growth come from? The only logically consistent answer within the framework of reincarnation is this: souls come from other worlds. When their karma ripens for incarnation on Earth, they are born here. Population growth is explained by the influx of souls from outside. But why is there such an influx right now? The Vedas say that we live in Kali Yuga, the age of discord. This is the least favorable time for spiritual development. Why should souls incarnate right now? It would be wiser to wait for a more favorable era. We can assume that souls have no choice. Karma automatically determines the place and time of birth. If karma has ripened, the soul must be born regardless of the era. Then the current influx of souls can be explained by the fact that the karma of billions of beings from other worlds is ripening right now. But this raises a new question. What special event has occurred in other worlds? What caused the mass ripening of karma? What event caused billions of souls to simultaneously rush to be born on Earth? There is no answer. Not in the Vedas, not in the Puranas, not in the commentaries. It is not explained. The fact is simply stated. The population is growing, souls are coming. Where and why is the mystery. We analyzed thousands of pages of sacred texts, studied the commentaries of theologians and philosophers, compared different traditions, and came to the conclusion that no religious system provides a logically consistent explanation for the origin and number of souls. Christianity and Islam require belief in continuous creation of millions of souls, knowing that many will go to hell. Hinduism requires belief in the influx of souls from unknown worlds for unknown reasons. Buddhism generally denies the existence of a permanent soul, offering the concept of a stream of consciousness, which contradicts the intuitive sense of one's own identity. Every system has logical holes. Each requires assumptions that cannot be verified, and each leaves the fundamental question unanswered. If the soul is immortal, eternal, and indivisible, where do so many of them come from? Perhaps the problem is not that the explanations are insufficient. Perhaps the problem lies in the very concept of the soul. Perhaps the answer lies in the fact that the soul is not what we think it is. Perhaps religious descriptions are metaphors, attempts to convey in words what cannot be conveyed in words. Perhaps the soul is not an object in space, but something else. Some mystical traditions say that there is no individual soul. There is only one soul, one consciousness, which manifests itself through billions of forms. You, me, all people,
All living beings are manifestations of the One. The illusion of separateness is created by the limitations of the body and mind. This concept of non-duality in Advaita solves the problem of quantity. There is no need to explain where new souls come from, because there are no new souls. There is one consciousness playing an infinite number of roles. Population growth is simply an increase in the number of forms through which the One manifests itself. But this contradicts basic experience. I feel separate from you. I have my own thoughts, feelings, and memories. How can there be one consciousness when experience is so clearly individual? Advaita responds that individuality is my illusion. Just as waves on the surface of the ocean appear to be separate, but they are all water, or as roles in a play appear to be different characters, but they are all played by one actor. It's a beautiful metaphor, but a metaphor is not proof. If this is true, why don't we remember our unity? Why is the illusion of separateness so convincing? And most importantly, who created this illusion and why? Advaita responds that forgetting unity is part of the game. Brahman, absolute consciousness, creates the illusion of multiplicity in order to know itself through the experience of separateness. This is the cosmic game, Leela. The One pretends to be many in order to experience what is impossible in a state of unity. Love, for example. You cannot love yourself the way you can love another. The illusion of separateness is necessary. It sounds poetic, but why does this game involve suffering? Why should the one consciousness experience pain, loss, and despair through its manifestations?
Why should Brahman experience the death of a child, war, or illness? What is the meaning of this experience? Advaita Vedanta says that suffering arises from identification with form. When consciousness forgets its true nature and considers itself to be the body, the fear of death arises. When it remembers unity, suffering disappears. All these are temporary waves on the surface of the eternal ocean. But this does not negate the reality of pain at the moment of its experience. To tell a person who is losing a loved one that this is an illusion and that everything is one is to devalue their experience. Pain is real to the one who feels it. And if all this is Brahman's game, then it is a very cruel game. Let's get back to the facts. We have population growth. We have religious claims about the immortality of the soul. We have a logical contradiction between these two facts. What does science tell us? Neuroscience shows that consciousness correlates with brain activity. Every thought, every feeling, every memory is associated with certain patterns of neural activity. We can track this using functional magnetic resonance imaging. We can see which areas of the brain are activated during various mental processes. When a person dies, brain activity ceases. First, the cortex shuts down, then the midbrain, then the brain stem. A few minutes after cardiac arrest, irreversible damage to neurons occurs, a process we call brain death. If consciousness is a function of the brain, it should disappear with the cessation of brain activity. But religions claim that the soul continues to exist. It leaves the body and enters another state. How can these two pictures be reconciled? There are people who have experienced clinical death. They talk about leaving their bodies, about a tunnel with light, about meeting deceased relatives. This is used as proof of the existence of the soul. But science explains these experiences differently. When the brain experiences oxygen deprivation, hallucinations begin. The visual cortex is randomly activated, creating visions. The temporal lobes, responsible for memory and emotions, produce images of significant people.
The sensation of leaving the body arises from a malfunction in the parietal cortex, which is responsible for perceiving the position of the body in space. All of this can be reproduced experimentally. Stimulation of certain areas of the brain causes the sensation of leaving the body. The intake of certain substances creates experiences indistinguishable from descriptions of the afterlife. If the soul really leaves the body, why can its experience be simulated chemically? Defenders of the existence of the soul respond that science studies only physical correlates. The fact that consciousness is connected to the brain does not mean that it is produced by the brain. Perhaps the brain is a receiver, not a generator. A radio receives a signal, but does not create it. Break the radio and the music will disappear. But that does not mean that the music existed only in the radio. It's a beautiful analogy, but it has a problem. We can detect radio waves independently of the receiver. We can locate the transmitter. We can measure the signal. But where is the transmitter of consciousness? Where is the signal of the soul that the brain picks up? There is no instrument that can detect something immaterial leaving the body at the moment of death. Experiments have been conducted to weigh dying people. They tried to record the loss of mass at the moment of death, attributing it to the departure of the soul. The results were not confirmed in repeated tests. They tried to detect changes in the electromagnetic field around the dying person. Nothing. They looked for infrared radiation, temperature changes, any physical trace. Nothing. If the soul really leaves the body, it leaves no measurable traces. It can be said that the soul is immaterial and therefore does not interact with matter. But then, how does it affect the brain? If it is immaterial, it cannot move neurons, it cannot trigger chemical reactions, it cannot create electrical impulses. This leads to Descartes' dualism with all its problems. Descartes assumed that the soul interacts with the body through the pineal gland. We now know that this is absurd. The pineal gland produces melatonin and regulates circadian rhythms. It has no special status. And most importantly, the problem remains. How does the immaterial influence the material? If the soul can influence matter, it must itself possess certain properties that allow this interaction. But any property that allows interaction with matter makes the object part of the material world. This means that it is measurable. Therefore, we should have discovered it. This logical impasse forces some philosophers to abandon the idea of the soul as a separate substance. They propose the concept of emergence. Consciousness arises as a new quality when a certain level of complexity of matter is reached, similar to how water has properties of fluidity that individual molecules do not have. This model is elegant.
It does not require the postulation of an immaterial substance, does not create a problem of interaction, explains why consciousness depends on the state of the brain, and solves our initial problem. There is no need to explain the origin of billions of souls. Consciousness arises automatically with the formation of each new brain. But this model kills the hope for life after death. If consciousness is an emergent property of the brain, it disappears when the brain is destroyed, just as the fluidity of water disappears when it evaporates. The molecules remain, but the property disappears. For many people, this is unacceptable. The idea of one's own complete disappearance causes existential horror. We want to believe that something will remain, that personality, memory, and experience will not disappear without a trace, that death is not the end, but a transition. This need for continuity is so strong that it has given rise to all religious systems. Each culture has created its own version of the afterlife.
the Egyptian fields of Yaru, the Greek Elysian fields, the Christian paradise, the Islamic Jannah, the Scandinavian Valhalla, the Hindu Svarag. It is interesting that all these concepts arose independently in different cultures. One could say that this is proof of the reality of the afterlife. That is, different peoples intuitively feel the same truth. But there is another explanation. All people have the same psychology, the same fear of death, the same need for comfort, and they create similar stories. Neuropsychology explains the belief in the afterlife through the mechanism of theory of mind. This is the ability to model the mental states of other people. When we see a person, we automatically attribute intentions, desires, and beliefs to them. This helped our ancestors predict the behavior of their tribesmen. But this ability has a side effect. We continue to model mental states. Even after a person's death, a widow talks to her deceased husband. A child feels the presence of a deceased parent. This does not mean that the deceased really exist. It means that our brain cannot easily turn off the model of another mind. This inability to imagine the complete disappearance of consciousness gave rise to the concept of the soul. We cannot imagine non-existence from within. Any attempt to think about one's own disappearance presupposes the existence of the one who thinks. This results in a paradox. I cannot imagine my absence, because imagination requires an imaginer. Philosopher Thomas Nagel wrote an essay titled, "What is it like to be a bat?" His argument is that subjective experience cannot be reduced to an objective description. We can study the bat's brain and learn all about its neural processes, but we will never understand what it is like to experience echolocation from the inside. This argument is used to defend the existence of consciousness as something separate from physical processes. But it does not prove the existence of the soul. It only shows the limitations of reductionism. The fact that we cannot fully explain subjective experience in terms of neurons does not mean that we need an immaterial soul. It is possible to acknowledge the reality of subjective experience without postulating a separate substance. Subjectivity is a first-person perspective. It is inseparable from the process, but it does not exist independently. The center of a circle only exists in the context of the circle. Remove the circle, and the center disappears. If we apply this logic to the soul, we get the following: the sense of self, the continuity of personality. Memory is all patterns in a neural network. They create the illusion of a single observer, but there is no observer as a separate entity. There is only the process of observation. Buddhist philosophy came to this conclusion 2,500 years ago. Anatman, the absence of a permanent self. Buddha taught that what we call ourselves is 5 skandhas, 5 aggregates: form, sensations, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. These aggregates are constantly changing. There is no unchanging core that remains the same. This can be verified through meditative experience. When you closely observe your own mind, you do not find the observer. There are thoughts, but there is no one who thinks. This is all a stream of processes without a central agent. Western philosophy resisted this idea for a long time. Descartes built his entire system on "I think, therefore I am." The existence of a thinking subject seemed self-evident. But Hume, and later contemporary philosophers pointed out problems with this. When Hume tried to find his self through introspection, he found only separate impressions and ideas, but not the one who experiences them. As soon as he tried to grasp himself, only another impression was grasped. The subject slipped away. Modern neuroscience confirms this. There is no area of the brain responsible for the self. There is no center where everything comes together. Instead, there are distributed networks that process information in parallel.
The feeling of a unified self is a construct created by these networks. This explains disorders such as split personality syndrome. When the connections between the hemispheres are damaged, each begins to behave as a separate subject. The right hand can do one thing, the left another. Which one is the real me? Both, not one. There are experiments with split brains that show even stranger results. A patient with a severed corpus callosum is shown different images to each eye. The left hemisphere sees one thing, the right another. When asked what he saw, the patient names what the left hemisphere saw because it is responsible for speech. But the right hemisphere also saw it. It just cannot say so. Such a person has two centers of consciousness, or one that is divided. And if the corpus callosum is reconnected, will the two consciousnesses merge into one? These questions show how problematic the idea of a single, indivisible self is. Let's return to our original problem through the prism of this understanding. If there is no permanent self, then there is no question of the number of souls, because souls, in the traditional sense, do not exist. There are only temporary patterns of consciousness that arise and disappear. But this creates another problem. If every moment of consciousness is unique and unrelated to the previous one, what ensures continuity? Why do I remember yesterday and consider that person to be myself? Buddhism answers this through the concept of flow. Each moment of consciousness gives rise to the next, like one candle lighting another. The flame is not the same, but there is a causal connection. Thus, memory and habits are passed from moment to moment, creating the illusion of continuity. In the context of reincarnation, this means that it is not the soul that is reborn, but the flow of karma. Actions in this life create imprints of samskara. They determine the next birth, but there is no permanent self that passes from life to life. There is only a causal chain of mental states. This model solves the problem elegantly. There is no need to explain where new souls come from. Souls, as separate entities, do not exist. There are only countless streams of consciousness that temporarily take the form of a personality. When the body dies, the stream does not stop. It takes on a new form, determined by karma. But to the Western mind, this concept seems unsatisfactory. If I am not reborn as myself, but only my karma creates a new personality, then what is the point of talking about my rebirth? It will be someone else. For me, this is equivalent to death. Buddhists respond that attachment to the idea of a permanent self is the source of suffering. Liberation comes through understanding anatman. When you see that the self is illusory, the fear of losing it disappears. There is nothing to die, because there was no permanent essence from the beginning. This is philosophically profound, but emotionally difficult. People want to believe in the continuation of themselves, not as a faceless stream of karma, but as a specific personality with memory and experience. This is precisely what is promised by Christianity and Islam: the resurrection of the body and soul, the preservation of personal identity in the afterlife. But this raises another question. Which version of me will be resurrected? Me at 3, me at 30, me at 80? Personality changes throughout life. An infant and an old man with one body are in fact different people. with different memories, characters, and views. Which one is the real me? The traditional answer of Christian theology is this: the ideal version will be resurrected, a body in its prime, a mind in full clarity, without the illnesses and imperfections of earthly life. But then it's not really me. It's an improved copy. If all my flaws are removed, will I still be myself? My anxieties, insecurities, and fears are part of me. If they are not there in paradise, I will be a different person, happier perhaps, but not me. It turns out that what is promised here is not the preservation of personality, but its transformation. One could say that the essence, a kind of core of personality, will remain unchanged. But what is this core? Memory changes and distorts. Character also evolves. Preferences depend on age and circumstances. What exactly makes me me over time? Philosophers call this the problem of personal identity. There is no consensus on what constitutes personal identity: psychological continuity, physical continuity, or something else. There is a thought experiment with Theseus's ship. The ship is gradually repaired, replacing plank after plank. In the end, not a single original plank remains. It is the same ship. But if a second ship is built from the old planks, which one is the real one? Applied to humans, the question is this: the cells of the body are constantly being renewed. In 7 years, almost all cells are replaced. I am not physically the same person I was 7 years ago, but I consider myself to be the same person. Why? Because there is continuity of memory and psychological connections.
I remember myself 7 years ago. My current beliefs grew out of the beliefs of that person. There is a causal chain connecting me to my past self, but memory is unreliable. We constantly distort memories, forget parts of the past, and invent events that did not happen. Every time we remember, we slightly rewrite our memory. A 60-year-old person remembers not the actual events of 30 years ago, but the latest version of their memories of those events. If personality is a stream of changing memories and characteristics, then there is no essence that remains constant. There is only a sequence of moments connected by causality and memory. But at each moment, it is a slightly different person. This conclusion brings Western philosophy closer to the Buddhist concept of anatman. Perhaps Buddha was right when he said that there is no permanent self. Perhaps all attempts by religion to postulate an immortal soul are an attempt to grasp something that does not exist. But if there is no soul, what then experiences the mystical experience? Many people describe experiences that they interpret as contact with the soul, with the higher self, with the divine. Mystics of all traditions speak of merging with the absolute, of losing the boundaries of the individual self. Neuroscience offers an explanation. The parietal cortex is responsible for the sensation of bodily boundaries and separation from the environment. When its activity decreases, the sense of boundaries between oneself and the world disappears. This causes an experience of unity, boundlessness, dissolution into infinity. This state can be induced by meditation, prayer, breathing practices, and psychedelics. All of these reduce the activity of the parietal cortex. Subjectively, this is experienced as going beyond the ego, as an encounter with a higher reality. But objectively, it is a change in the brain's functioning. Does this mean that mystical experiences are an illusion? Not necessarily. It can be said that it shows another aspect of reality, an aspect that is usually hidden due to the focus on the individual self. When this self temporarily disappears, perception without subject and object opens up. But this does not prove the existence of an immortal soul.
It shows that the feeling of a separate self is conditional and can be temporarily disabled, that there are states of consciousness in which boundaries dissolve, but when the effect wears off, normal perception returns. If the soul really existed as an eternal, indivisible entity, we would have direct access to it at all times, but we do not. Most of the time, we identify with the body, thoughts, and emotions. Only in rare moments does a different sensation arise, and it is unstable. This is more consistent with the idea that the ordinary ego and mystical experiences are different modes of brain function, not the discovery of an eternal soul, but a temporary shift in perception that is interesting, profound, and transformative, but not proof of life after death.